So here's the thing nobody talks about. Sometimes protecting someone you love means keeping certain truths to yourself. I'm 28, my name's Riley, and 3 years ago I made what I thought was the smartest decision of my life. I buried a secret so deep, I almost convinced myself it never happened. Everyone thinks I'm this reformed party girl who found love and settled down, but honestly the truth is way messier than that perfect little story everyone wants to believe. I met Kyle at work about 4 years ago, and he was everything I thought I wanted at the time. Stable job in his department, owned his own place, actually wanted to commit instead of playing games like every other guy I dated. The kind of man who'd never cheat because he's too busy being responsible and, frankly, kind of boring. Perfect husband material, though, right? We got engaged after dating for 8 months because, honestly, I was exhausted from the dating scene. And he seemed safe. Like really safe. The type who brings you soup when you're sick and remembers to change the air filters without being asked. But 3 months before our wedding, I went on this work conference, and everything went completely sideways. There was this guy, Jacob, from our sister office, who I'd been flirting with over company email for months. Nothing serious at first, just harmless attention that made me feel alive again. You know how it is when someone new pays attention to you, and suddenly you remember what it feels like to be wanted, instead of just comfortable. Well, harmless until we ended up at the hotel bar after the conference dinner, talking until like 2 in the morning. I remember thinking Kyle would never know. Kyle would never even think to ask about stuff like this. And what he doesn't know won't hurt him. One thing led to another, and I woke up in Jacob's room the next morning feeling like absolute garbage. Not because I felt guilty exactly. Honestly, I felt more annoyed that I'd been so sloppy about the whole thing. The guilt came later when I realized this could completely ruin everything I'd built with Kyle. So I made a choice that morning, while Jacob was still sleeping. I decided it never happened. Just like that. I got dressed, went back to my room, showered, and flew home like it was any other business trip. I stopped drinking completely after that, told Kyle it was for health reasons, and started going to therapy. Not because I felt terrible about cheating, but because I needed to make sure I never got caught or put myself in that position again. The therapist actually helped me rationalize the whole thing. She said if it was truly a one-time mistake and I was taking active steps to prevent it from happening again, telling Kyle would only hurt him unnecessarily. See? Even a professional agreed with my approach. Why destroy someone's peace of mind over something that meant absolutely nothing to me and would never happen again? I threw myself into being the perfect fiancée after that. Then, the perfect wife. I cooked Kyle's favorite meals every week, kept our place spotless, never gave him any reason to doubt me or wonder what I was up to. For 3 years, I built this beautiful life on top of my secret, and honestly, I was proud of how well I'd handled such a complicated situation. Kyle never suspected anything, because why would he? I'm not some serial cheater running around behind his back constantly. I made one tiny mistake during a stressful time, and then spent years making up for it in ways he didn't even realize. Everyone always says honesty is the best policy, but sometimes protecting someone you love means keeping certain truths to yourself. I convinced myself I was being noble about the whole thing, sparing him unnecessary pain that would serve no purpose except to make him miserable. Our marriage was genuinely happy because I made sure it was that way. I put in the work every single day. I showed up emotionally and physically. I played the devoted wife part perfectly. Between you and me, I started to believe my own story after a while. That the girl who cheated wasn't really me, just some drunk version of myself that didn't count as the real me. I even managed to avoid Jacob completely after that night. Different departments, different cities most of the time. Super easy to pretend he didn't exist in my world. Until last week, when everything I'd carefully constructed over 3 years came crashing down around me. And honestly, I'm still processing how completely unfair this whole situation turned out to be. Kyle left for work last Tuesday morning, same as always. I was working from home in my pajamas, just minding my own business, when my phone rang around 2 in the afternoon. Unknown number, which I normally never answer because who has time for spam calls, but something made me pick up this time. It was this woman's voice, kind of shaky and nervous, asking if I was Riley and if I knew someone named Jacob from work. My stomach absolutely dropped, but I played dumb, obviously. Said, yeah, we work for the same company, but I barely know the guy, different departments and all that. She introduced herself as Veronica, Jacob's wife, and said she needed to tell me something important that was going to affect my life, whether I wanted it to or not. Apparently, her perfect husband had been cheating on her for years. Not just with me, but with multiple women from work conferences and business trips. She'd finally had enough of living like that and gave him an ultimatum: confess everything to everyone involved, or she'd divorce him and take half of everything, including his precious boat and motorcycle collection. The coward chose option 1 rather than fight for his marriage. She started listing off dates and locations like she was reading from some kind of evidence file. And when she got to the conference 3 years ago, my heart started racing. She knew everything about that night: what hotel we stayed at, what room Jacob was in, even what I was wearing at the conference dinner. Jacob had apparently kept some kind of sick trophy list of all his conquests over the years, like we were collecting cards or something. Veronica wasn't calling to blame me or start drama between us women. She was calling because she thought I deserved a heads up that my husband was probably going to find out soon. Jacob was supposed to call Kyle that evening and confess his part in everything. She said she was tired of being the only one living with lies, while everyone else got to stay comfortable in their fake perfect marriages. Easy for her to say though, right? She was getting divorced anyway, so what did she have to lose at that point? I had an actual marriage to protect, a life I'd built, a future I'd planned. I tried to convince her that maybe we could handle this situation differently. Maybe Jacob didn't need to involve Kyle since it happened so long ago and meant nothing to anyone involved. But she wasn't having any of that. She said everyone deserved to know the truth about who they were married to, and she was done protecting cheating men and the women who enabled them. Which was completely unfair because I hadn't enabled anything. I made one mistake years ago and then became a better person because of it. After she hung up, I spent the rest of the day frantically trying to figure out how to handle this mess that was about to explode in my face. I thought about calling Jacob myself and begging him not to say anything to Kyle, or maybe telling Kyle myself first so I could control the narrative and explain things properly. But honestly, I was mostly just angry that this was even happening to me. I'd managed this situation perfectly for 3 years. I'd become a better wife, a better person. I'd learned from my mistake and grown because of it. And now some bitter woman was going to destroy my entire life because she couldn't handle her own marriage problems without dragging everyone else down with her. When Kyle got home that night, he seemed totally normal. Made dinner for us, we watched our usual shows, went to bed like any other Tuesday. I was starting to think maybe Jacob had chickened out at the last minute and decided not to make those calls after all. Maybe he realized how much damage he'd be causing to innocent people who'd moved on with their lives. But then yesterday morning, Kyle's phone rang during breakfast while we were both getting ready for work. I watched his entire face change as he listened to whoever was on the other end. When he hung up, he just stared at me for what felt like forever before asking if there was anything I needed to tell him about a work trip from 3 years ago. My heart was absolutely racing, but I tried to stay calm and play innocent. Asked him what he meant. What about a work trip? Which conference was he talking about? He said someone had just called him with some very interesting information about his wife and something that happened during a business conference. The way he was looking at me, I knew there was no point in lying anymore or trying to pretend I didn't know what he was talking about. So I broke down crying right there in our kitchen. Not because I felt guilty exactly, but because I was so frustrated that my perfectly managed situation was falling apart because of someone else's drama and bitterness. I told him it was the worst mistake I'd ever made in my entire life, that I'd been carrying this burden alone for years, that I'd changed everything about myself to make sure nothing like it ever happened again. All of which was completely true, by the way. But Kyle wasn't buying into the guilt and remorse angle like I expected him to. He wanted details about that night. wanted to know exactly what happened and why I never told him before we got married. Wanted to know what else I might be hiding from him and whether our entire relationship was built on lies. And honestly, his reaction was way more dramatic than the situation called for. Like, I get that he was upset, but we're talking about one drunken night 3 years ago that meant absolutely nothing to me. One night compared to 3 years of being a faithful, devoted wife who put his needs first in everything. Kyle completely lost it, which honestly surprised me because he's usually so calm and level-headed about everything. He started pacing around our kitchen, running his hands through his hair, asking the same questions over and over again. Why didn't I tell him before we got married? How could I look him in the eye every single day for 3 years? Did I think he was stupid or something? What else was I lying about? I tried my best to explain that I was protecting him from unnecessary pain, that there was no point in ruining our relationship over one drunken mistake that meant absolutely nothing to me. I reminded him that I'd completely changed my lifestyle afterward. I stopped drinking entirely, started going to therapy, became a better partner in every way possible. Wasn't that proof that I loved him and wanted our marriage to work? But he kept fixating on the lying part, like that was somehow worse than the actual cheating. He said he felt like he didn't even know who I really was, like our entire relationship was built on deception and manipulation. Which was completely unfair because everything else about us was real and genuine. One mistake doesn't erase 3 years of being a good wife and building a solid marriage together. Then he started getting all dramatic and emotional, saying he needed space to think and couldn't even look at me right then. He grabbed some clothes from our closet and said he was going to stay at his cousin's place until he figured out what he wanted to do about our marriage. I told him he was seriously overreacting to the situation. That couples work through stuff like this all the time and come out stronger, but he wouldn't even listen to reason at that point. Before he walked out the door, he asked me point blank if there was anything else I was hiding from him. Any other secrets he should know about. I said absolutely not, which was the complete truth. Jacob was literally the only thing I'd ever kept from him in our entire relationship. But apparently my word doesn't mean anything to him anymore because of one mistake from years ago. After he left, I called my sister to vent about the whole situation, and she was actually on my side for once. She said men always blow these things completely out of proportion, and that if Kyle really loved me, he'd be able to forgive one mistake from 3 years ago. My mom was less supportive when I talked to her later. She started lecturing me about honesty in marriage and how I should have told Kyle before our wedding day. But my mom's been married 4 times, so I don't think she's exactly the authority on making relationships work long term. Sometimes you have to make tough choices to protect what you've built. The worst part was going to work the next day and having to act completely normal when I felt like everyone was staring at me. I kept wondering if other people knew about the situation, if Jacob had told anyone else at the office, if this was going to become workplace gossip that followed me around. I couldn't focus on anything because I kept thinking about how unfair this whole situation was turning out to be. I'd handled my mistake perfectly from day one. I'd changed my behavior, worked on myself, became a better partner in every way. Most women who cheat don't do half of what I did to make things right with their relationship. But instead of getting credit for how well I'd managed everything, I was being punished for something that happened 3 years ago. Kyle texted me a few times asking practical questions about bills and house stuff, but he wouldn't engage when I tried to talk about us and our future together. I suggested couples counseling, reminded him that my therapist had said keeping the secret was actually the healthier choice for our relationship, but he said he needed more time to process everything. Time for what exactly? To punish me? To make me suffer for protecting his feelings all these years? I started to realize that maybe Kyle wasn't as mature and understanding as I thought he was when I married him. A real partner would understand that people make mistakes and focus on how much I'd grown since then. Instead, he was acting like some kind of victim when I was the one who'd been carrying this burden alone for 3 years. Kyle came back after 4 days, but he was completely different. Cold, distant, asking weird, specific questions about my work trips, and checking my phone constantly, like I was some kind of criminal. Apparently, he'd spent his time away doing some kind of investigation like he was a detective or something, instead of working on his own issues. He'd called my workplace, looked up details about the conference, even contacted other people who were there that week. The level of paranoia was honestly insulting to me and our marriage. He found out that Jacob and I had been emailing back and forth for months before the conference happened, which I'd conveniently forgotten to mention during our kitchen breakdown. They weren't even flirty emails, though. Just normal work stuff, with maybe some harmless joking around between colleagues. But Kyle was treating them like smoking gun evidence of some elaborate long-term affair. He printed them out and highlighted parts like, "Looking forward to seeing you there," and "Dinner should be fun with everyone." Normal professional stuff that he was twisting into something sinister. Then he started questioning everything else about our relationship. Why I really stopped drinking. Why I started therapy. Whether there were other men I'd been friendly with over the years. He even asked about my male coworkers, and whether I'd ever grabbed drinks with them after work or spent time together outside the office. I felt like I was being interrogated in my own home by someone who was supposed to love and trust me. The absolute worst part was when he started going through our wedding photos and videos, pointing out how fake I looked, how I was acting, happy while hiding this huge secret from him. He said he felt sick looking at pictures of our wedding day, knowing I was lying to him even then, which was completely unfair because I was genuinely happy that day. Marrying Kyle was exactly what I wanted at that time in my life, and my past mistake had nothing to do with my real feelings for him. But try explaining that to someone who's decided to play the victim in every situation. He also talked to Veronica behind my back, Jacob's wife, which I thought was completely inappropriate. Apparently, she'd told him more details about her husband's other affairs and how I fit the pattern of women Jacob targeted at work events. I was furious that they were discussing me like I was some kind of case study or research project. Veronica didn't even know me as a person, and she was making assumptions about my character based on her cheating husband's behavior patterns. Just because Jacob was apparently a serial cheater didn't mean I was some serial mistress who went around destroying marriages. Kyle started individual therapy on his own, which should have been a positive thing, but his therapist was filling his head with all this psychological stuff about betrayal trauma and trust issues. He came back from sessions using therapy language to explain why he couldn't just get over it and move on with our lives. His therapist apparently told him that the lying was actually worse than the cheating because it showed a pattern of deception and manipulation on my part, which was completely ridiculous if you ask me. I wasn't manipulating anyone or trying to hurt anyone. I was protecting our relationship from unnecessary damage. There's a huge difference between those two things, but nobody seemed to want to understand my perspective. The most frustrating part was that Kyle completely ignored all the positive changes I'd made over 3 years. All that time being a faithful, dedicated wife meant absolutely nothing to him, because of one night I couldn't even remember clearly. He kept saying he didn't know what was real about our relationship, and what was just performance, like I'd been putting on some elaborate act for years. But everything about our relationship was real and genuine, except for that one secret I'd kept to protect both of us. I'd been a good wife, I'd made him happy for years, I'd built us a solid life together that most couples would be jealous of. Wasn't that worth something in his mind? Instead of focusing on our future and how we could move forward together, he was obsessed with picking apart the past and finding problems where none really existed. It was like he wanted to find reasons to stay angry instead of reasons to forgive me and rebuild whatever trust we'd lost. By week 3 of Kyle's investigation phase, I was completely done with his attitude and behavior. He was still sleeping in our guest room, barely talking to me except to ask more accusatory questions and treating me like some kind of criminal in my own home. So I decided to take control of the situation and give him an ultimatum, that would force him to make a decision. I told him he had exactly two choices: either forgive me and work on our marriage like mature adults, or divorce me and stop dragging this whole thing out indefinitely. I wasn't going to spend months walking on eggshells while he decided whether my 3-year-old mistake was forgivable or not. During this conversation, he hit me with the most ridiculous demand I'd ever heard in my life. He wanted me to quit my job and find work somewhere else completely, because he couldn't handle me being in the same company as Jacob. Even though Jacob worked in a different state most of the time, and I literally never saw him or interacted with him. I actually laughed out loud and told him absolutely not. I wasn't giving up my career and financial independence because of his insecurity issues and paranoia. I'd worked hard to get where I was professionally, and I wasn't starting over at some new company just to make him feel better about something that happened years ago. That's when Kyle showed his true colors and what this was really about for him. He said if I wouldn't quit my job, then he wanted me to sign some kind of post-nuptial agreement that would give him most of our assets if I ever cheated again. Basically, he wanted to punish me financially for a hypothetical future betrayal that wasn't even going to happen. I told him that was insulting and showed he had no real intention of actually trusting me again or working on our marriage. What kind of relationship could we possibly have if he was already planning for me to cheat again? But here's where I made my smartest move in this whole situation. I agreed to sign his ridiculous postnup, but with my own conditions attached to the deal. I told him I'd sign his agreement if he agreed to couples counseling with a therapist of my choosing, not his current individual therapist, who was clearly biased against me and our relationship. I also wanted him to stop discussing our private business with Veronica and anyone else from his little investigation team. What happened in our marriage should stay between us and our counselor, not become entertainment for random people who didn't even know us. Kyle agreed to my terms, probably thinking he was getting the better deal with his precious postnup protection. But I'd already done my research and found a therapist who specialized in helping couples move past infidelity and rebuild their relationships. Her whole approach was about forgiveness and moving forward, not dwelling on past mistakes that couldn't be changed. I knew that with the right professional guidance, I could help Kyle see that his reaction was actually way more damaging to our marriage than my original mistake ever was. I also started documenting everything during this time: his emotional outbursts, his unreasonable demands, his refusal to focus on our future instead of obsessing over the past. I figured if things went south with the counseling, I'd need evidence that he was the one being unreasonable and unwilling to work on our marriage like an adult. The postnup situation actually worked in my favor too, because it proved I was committed to our relationship and willing to put my financial security on the line. I was willing to risk everything to show him I had no intention of cheating again or betraying his trust. What more could he possibly want from me at that point? For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was back in control of the situation instead of just reacting to his drama. I had a solid plan to get our marriage back on track. Kyle had his security blanket with the postnup, and we were going to start fresh with professional help. I was even feeling optimistic about the whole thing for the first time since this mess started. Sure, it had been a rough month for both of us, but lots of couples go through rough patches and come out stronger on the other side. I was confident that once we got into counseling and Kyle started focusing on our future instead of my past, everything would go back to normal. I just needed to be patient while he worked through his trust issues and insecurity problems with professional guidance. Everything fell apart during our second couples counseling session, though. I thought we were actually making real progress up to that point. Kyle seemed calmer during our sessions. We were talking about rebuilding trust and moving forward, and I was being completely transparent about everything he asked me. Then our therapist asked if there was anything else either of us needed to share to move forward successfully. Kyle looked at me expectantly, like he was waiting for me to confess some other secret or betrayal. I said no, I'd told him everything about what happened, and there was nothing else to hide from him. That's when he pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot that made my stomach drop to the floor. It was a message thread between me and my coworker Marcus from about 6 months ago, just casual texting about work projects and office stuff, but there were a few messages where we were joking around and maybe being slightly flirty with each other. Nothing serious at all. Just harmless banter between colleagues that meant absolutely nothing to either of us. But Kyle had somehow gotten hold of these deleted messages and was presenting them like smoking gun evidence of another affair or emotional betrayal. I couldn't believe he'd been going through my deleted messages and social media accounts like some kind of stalker or private investigator. The therapist asked me to explain the messages and what my relationship with Marcus was like. I tried to clarify that Marcus and I were just friends who sometimes joked around at work. There was no physical relationship, no emotional affair, just normal workplace friendship between two people who got along well. But Kyle wasn't buying any of my explanation. He said this proved I hadn't changed at all after what happened, that I was still maintaining inappropriate relationships with male coworkers and lying about it. The therapist started taking his side, asking why I hadn't mentioned this friendship before and whether I could see how it might look suspicious given my history with Jacob. I felt completely ganged up on and attacked for something that was completely innocent and meaningless. After the session, Kyle said he was done trying to work things out between us. He'd already contacted a divorce lawyer while we were supposedly working on our marriage and wanted me to move out of our house. Just like that, 3 years of marriage was over because of his paranoia and inability to trust me or forgive me. I tried to remind him about the postnup I'd signed and how I'd shown my commitment to our relationship by agreeing to his terms. But he said the Marcus situation proved the postnup was worthless because I was going to keep lying and hiding things anyway, no matter what I promised. When I asked where I was supposed to go and how I was supposed to start over, he suggested I figure it out the same way I'd figured out how to hide things from him for years. The divorce proceedings turned out to be absolutely brutal for me. Kyle's lawyer painted me as this serial cheater and manipulator, using what happened with Jacob and the Marcus messages as evidence of a pattern of deception and betrayal. My lawyer kept telling me to take whatever settlement Kyle offered, because fighting it would be expensive, and I probably wouldn't win given the postnup I'd signed. So I ended up with barely enough money to rent a tiny studio apartment across town, while Kyle kept our house, most of our savings, and even our dog that I'd picked out and trained. 8 months later, I'm starting completely over at 28, living in a place that's half the size of our guest room, working the same job where everyone knows about my divorce drama. Kyle has apparently moved on already with his life. I heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone new, some girl who works at his gym. Of course, she's probably younger than me and has no complicated history for him to obsess over and pick apart. The whole thing is so unfair it makes me angry every time I think about how it all went down. I made one mistake 3 years ago, handled it the best way I knew how at the time, and tried everything possible to save my marriage when the truth came out. But Kyle was more interested in punishing me than forgiving me and moving forward together. Some people just can't handle that. Relationships take real work, and that nobody's perfect all the time. His loss, honestly, because I would have been a good wife to him for the rest of our lives if he'd just been able to get over his pride and trust issues.